He's on a desperate mission.
The year might be 2025, but it's still hard to forget the late Don LaFontaine's voiceover in Canon's over-the-top promotional video where he says, "We are Canon Films, and we are dynamite." Given that a car is seen exploding right after this, we say that voiceover is pretty apt. Well, we're looking at a movie production house that used to generate more than a dozen films per year. Despite the Canon Group being non-operational today, there's no reason not to celebrate this legendary film studio's absolute masterpieces that still feel fresh to watch. Mind you, this is going to be quite the trip down memory lane, so we suggest you stay tuned right to the end of this video. Who knows, you might end up seeing your favorite Canon films on our list, or if you're really lucky, you might find a new one to add to the old binge list. We're ready to dive right into this video, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we do have a very small request. If you enjoy our content, then please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Bloodsport, 1988. Newt Arnold's Bloodsport has often been marketed as a true story since it was based on martial artist and fight choreographer Frank Dux's real-life claims. Written by Sheldon Lettich, Christopher Cosby, and Mel Friedman, this film has Jean-Claude Van Damme starring as Frank Dux, a U.S. soldier who's also highly proficient in ninjutsu, participating in a no-holds-barred, illegal, and underground martial arts tournament known as the Kumite in Hong Kong. Many of you might not know this, but Bloodsport, which was a considerable box office success despite its negative critical reviews, was actually one of the films that launched Van Damme's career as a mainstream action star. The film, in due course, amassed a huge cult following, and truth be told, it was the success of this movie that helped the resurgence of the martial arts film genre in the US. Van Damme was undoubtedly the high point of the film, and one has to admit his athletic skills are far superior when compared to his acting chops. No wonder he shines here, and it feels like the movie was literally made for him. Witnessing Van Damme doing his splits and having his martial arts skill fully on display is nothing but a sheer treat for the eyes. Safe to say, Bloodsport, with its standard 80s cliches, is a surprisingly charming film that manages to hold up. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, 1986. The 1981 theatrical re-release of Tobe Hooper's defining horror classic, more famously known as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, led Hooper to begin developing a sequel to his original movie. Written by L.M. Kit Carson, the ambitious sequel has radio DJ Vanita Stretch Brock getting terrorized by Leatherface and his family of cannibalistic serial killers. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Bode Lefty Enright, uncle of Sally and Franklin Hardesty from the first film, is on a personal quest for vengeance against the deranged, murderous cannibal clan. There's so much blood and gore here, to call this film a bloodbath would be an understatement. It's explicit enough that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 has gone with the more is more approach. This time, the new home of the Sawyer family happens to be a subterranean lair hidden beneath a rundown, abandoned amusement park. One that's big enough to store the numerous grisly remains of their many victims. We're talking about skeletal decor, hooks, and cobwebs, and dare we disregard the blood-oozing walls. Definitely one of the film's high points. You'll be surprised to learn that Hooper and Kim Henkel, the latter being the original film's co-writer, initially had an idea for a sequel that would have an entire town packed to the brim with cannibals. The original title of the sequel was Beyond the Valley of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Of course, it didn't sit well with the studio, and some substantial changes were made to the screenplay. So much so, Carson was hired as the new screenwriter, and the rest, as you know, is history. While the kills featured in the sequel aren't exactly first-grade chopped steak, they are bloody, violent, and there's no denying that. So if you happen to like your steak rare, you're gonna love what you see here. Lifeforce, 1985. Tobe Hooper's British sci-fi horror extravaganza, which is backed by a screenplay by Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby, is based on Colin Wilson's 1976 novel titled The Space Vampires. The narrative of Lifeforce has the crew of a European space shuttle discovering a trio of humanoids in a state of suspended animation in the hold of an alien spaceship and bringing them to Earth, completely unaware that they have brought back space-shifting space vampires who are capable of sucking the life force out of people as well as turning them into zombies. zombies. Lifeforce is a Canon Films production, which means it would be a sin to expect anything less here. Yes, it's flashy, and some would even say over the top, but there was no stopping the movie from becoming a cult film later. Well, when you have a flick blending themes of vampirism and extraterrestrial life with the genres of horror and sci-fi, and to top things further, Hooper at the director's helm, you know for a fact that it's going to be both glorious and wild. If you ask us, Lifeforce is a rather interesting take on the vampire lore. Here, vampires don't do conventional things like sucking blood. Instead, they like draining out the life force from humans to nourish themselves. From the polished special FX to the bombastic musical score by Henry Mancini, Lifeforce is categorically an underrated gem. Cobra. 1986. George P. Cosmatos' Cobra, starring the iconic Sylvester Stallone in the titular role, was the biggest financial success for Canon Films, earning around $160 million on a budget of just $25 million. Written by Stallone and loosely based on Paula Gosling's 1974 novel initially titled A Running Duck and later published as Fair Game, the storyline follows Lieutenant Marion Cobra Cobretti probing deeper into a string of violent crimes that are being committed by a murderous cult that loathes modern society and particularly aims to weed out the weak. When Cobra is tasked with protecting a key witness who's become the primary target of the cult followers, he takes it upon himself to ensure her safety. First things first, it's a sheer treat to witness Stallone as the sunglass-donning, matchstick-chewing cop, one who is more than often criticized for his brutal and unconventional ways of dealing with criminals. Add to this Stallone's screenplay, which is pretty simple if we're being honest, but it has an underlying message that states evil is a force that must be met on its own terms. Despite its excessive violence and overused genre tropes, Cobra emerged as a cult classic. You see, Cobra was never going to be more than brain-dead action, but then again, that's what made it appealing at the end of the day. Well, there's actually also the late Rick Waite's cinematography work, along with Sylvester LeVay's dark, brooding synth score, of course. If you think otherwise, let us know in the comments section down below.
You gonna shoot me? I won't tell anybody. Well, where's that gonna get you?
Joe, 1970. You may not know this, but it was the success of John G. Avildsen's Joe, starring the legendary Peter Boyle, that actually brought more attention to the Canon production house. Written by Norman Wexler, the 1970s drama film, which also starred celebrated actor Susan Sarandon in her film debut, follows a wealthy advertising executive, Bill Compton, killing her hippie daughter's drug-dealing boyfriend in a fit of rage after she overdoses. Later, when Bill drunkenly blurts out about the killing to factory worker Joe Curran, what ensues is the duo forming an oddly dangerous bond with each other. Boasting a runtime of 107 minutes, Joe possesses the power to leave its viewers in a virtual state of shock, and those of you who have seen the film will unquestionably agree with us. The high point of the movie irrefutably happens to be Boyle as the titular Joe and his character's open hatred towards anything and anyone liberal. Clearly, the character of Joe is disillusioned by society, in which he no longer feels comfortable, and Boyle's portrayal could not get any better. Dennis Patrick as Bill Compton does a fine job too, delivering a performance of style and subtlety, thereby bringing both depth and intelligence to his character. Next comes Wexler's screenplay, which is very sharp and overflowing with dialogue that is both gritty and realistic. Add to this a memorable background score from Bobby Scott, along with some fantastic editing by George T. Norris and Avildsen's high-quality cinematography work, and you've got yourself a terrific film, one that has only become more relevant and entertaining with time. Masters of the Universe, 1987. The 80s were a time period where practically anybody could make a movie about anything and literally from anything. That's pretty much how Gary Goddard came up with his superhero film based on Mattel's Masters of the Universe franchise. Written by David Odell, the captivating plotline has the evil warlord Skeletor taking over Castle Grayskull and imprisoning the Sorceress of Grayskull, hoping to drain the Sorceress's powers and take control over the entire universe. Of course, Skeletor is confronted by his arch-enemy He-Man, who's come along with his companions to rescue the sorceress. However, the mighty warrior and his friends are forced to flee the castle, resorting to the Thenorian locksmith Gwildor's creation, a cosmic key capable of opening a portal to anywhere. This leads He-Man and his comrades to Earth, and the key is lost upon their arrival. After learning that Skeletor needs the key for his plans of global conquest, He-Man and his companions start looking for it. However, they're unaware that the cosmic key has been discovered by two California California teenagers who have inadvertently transmitted a signal, which in turn has Skeletor and his minions gearing up to recover the key and make Earth a battleground. It's no surprise that this movie, in spite of being a box office failure, critically and commercially, eventually became a cult film. Of course, one has to give complete credit to Goddard for being able to do what he could do with the budget he was provided with. Speaking of the film's high points, it's clearly the characters for us. Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, Frank Langella as Skeletor, James Tolkien as Detective Hy Lubick, and Meg Foster as the sublimely wicked Evil Lynn. Special emphasis on Lundgren for looking the part with his flowing blonde hair, hypnotizing blue eyes, and then of course, there's that Herculean physique of his which just can't be missed. Also, if you ask us, we think it's great that Lundgren's dialogue was kept to a minimum, so if you want to take a trip down memory lane, this movie is sure to provide you with some fond ones. American Ninja, 1985. Sam Furstenberg's first installment in the American Ninja franchise has orphan drifter Joe Armstrong finding himself on an American Army base in the Philippines after a judge gives him a choice between enlistment and prison. During one of his first missions steering a convoy, his entire unit gets killed by a group of Black Star ninjas who, apart from attempting to steal the weapons that the platoon was transporting, also kidnap Patricia Hickok, the commanding officer's daughter. While Joe manages to rescue Patricia, his inability to save his squadron makes his superiors think he's guilty of weakness, collaboration, and incompetency. Meanwhile, the Black Star Master vows to take vengeance on the soldier who interrupted his plans and sends an army of ninjas to slaughter Joe and bring back Patricia. Given that we're in 2025, there's a high possibility that American Ninja might seem ridiculous and unrealistic to many of you. But then again, this movie is so outlandish in the best way possible. It's strictly advised not to take this film seriously, so it's best not to expect anything else but action when you're watching it. American Ninja is brilliant in terms of its action sequences. The sword fighting scenes in the water certainly deserve a mention. There's also a particular shot that has a butterfly knife dangerously tossed back and forth against Joe, which is kind of spectacular. The ninjas are undoubtedly the stars of the movie. They're thoroughly entertaining, and also a special shout out to the late Steve James, who was simply marvelous in the role of Corporal Curtis Jackson despite his limited screen time. The Hitman, 1991. Directed by Aaron Norris and written by Don Carmody, this Canadian-American action film here has our all-time favorite, Chuck Norris, starring as Detective Cliff Garrett. Story-wise, after Garrett survives an attempt on his life that was made by his corrupt partner, Ronnie Del Delaney, he becomes Hitman Danny Grogan to take revenge on his former partner and bring down the criminal organization Del works for. Well, if you take a look at the action sequences on display, you'll notice how nicely orchestrated they actually are. So much so that they wouldn't even seem overdone given that we're currently in 2025 and the movie was released literally 34 years ago. Besides Chuck Norris delivering his signature kicks and punches and being simply spectacular, the Hitman also has Michael Parks and Al Waxman, who are excellent in their respective roles as the corrupt Del and mob boss Marco Lugani. It's safe to admit what the Hitman lacks in story, it makes up for in action. And while it may not be the best film ever made, it's certainly fun to watch. So why don't you give it a shot and decide for yourself. Invasion U.S.A. 1985. Joseph Vito's Invasion U.S.A., starring and co-written by Chuck Norris, has Matt Hunter, a former CIA agent coming out of retirement when a Soviet terrorist strategically unleashes a reign of terror on the U.S., transforming it into a war zone. Hunter, who has previously had the chance to kill Mikhail Rostov, finds himself coming face-to-face with his old foe once more. Will he be able to stem the rising tide of violence? Well, that's for you to find out once you see the movie, of course. There's no denying that Invasion U.S.A. is one of Cannon Films' most over-the-top action epics, boasting a horde of some of the most outlandish action sequences. Well, coming to Norris, it's fitting to admit that he's truly in top form as a gun-toting hardman, ready to stop the invasion single-handed if needed. Also, regardless of the number of assault rifles and explosives that are featured in the film, the most potent weapon in this movie undoubtedly happens to be Norris's oh-so-perfect beard. We've often asked ourselves, what is with this man and his impressive beard, but we haven't been able to get an answer, at least until now. Anyways, not that we intend to get distracted at all, but Zito's direction is notable here, and a strong performance from the late Richard Lynch definitely adds in favor of the flick's appeal. The Last American Virgin, 1982. In case you didn't know this, Boaz Davidson's The Last American Virgin is actually a remake of Davidson's 1978 film Lemon Popsicle, a movie that happens to be the most commercially successful Israeli film of all time. The 1982 flick follows high schoolers Gary, Rick, and David, all of whom have just one thing on their mind, and that is losing their virginity. However, Gary is more interested in finding true romance, so when he falls for the transfer student Karen, unexpected complications arise, with Karen getting involved with the slick-talking ladies' man, Rick. Despite being a coming-of-age sex comedy film, The Last American Virgin features an ending that's hard to forget to this day. Anybody who's seen the movie will agree with us on that. Given that this flick is all about the typical teenage silliness and the usual escapades of teens trying to lose their virginity, the ending really hits, leaving you speechless. We're not kidding, you'll actually feel sympathetic towards the main guy here, who just happens to be a luckless teenage boy. Truth be told, this is quite the underrated comedy, and it manages to hit the bullseye, but the real star of the film happens to be the soundtrack, and there are no doubts about it. King Lear. 1987. When Jean-Luc Godard directed King Lear, the film, in spite of being based on Shakespeare's The Tragedy of King Lear, was more like an adaptation of the play in the avant-garde style of French New Wave cinema. Therefore, to expect it to be a typical cinematic adaptation of the eponymous tragedy would most likely be a mistake. Now, in terms of the storyline, we're looking at a post-Chernobyl world with no place for culture. Enter William Shakespeare Jr. V, one who takes up the responsibility of bringing back the lost charm of art by reconstructing his ancestors' play. First things first, Godard's recreation of Shakespeare's King Lear is not for everyone. If you tend to have an open mind and are willing to experiment with films, you'll find that this movie is both powerful and misunderstood. In short, compelling and unconventional enough to be addressed as the work of a certified genius. This is the kind of film that makes you think and makes you wonder what it is the director was trying to tell you. Clearly, Godard made King Lear so as to communicate with the audience.
Stand them up.
Cyborg, 1989. Albert Pyun's martial arts cyberpunk film has a post-apocalyptic setting where an outbreak known as the Living Death has almost crippled evolution. A tiny group of surviving scientists are doing their best, working on a cure to save whatever's left of humanity. However, in order to complete their work, they need access to some data stored in a computer in New York City. Pearl Prophet volunteers for the dangerous mission. She's made into a cyborg through surgical augmentation and sent to retrieve the information. Not long after Pearl gets her hands on the data, she's abducted by the malicious Fender Tremolo and his crew of murderous marauders. Now, it's up to mercenary Gibson Rickenbacker to not only save Pearl from Fender, but also take revenge against him, as he was the one responsible for slaughtering Gibson's family. Many of you might not know this, but Cyborg happens to be the last certified theatrical release for the Cannon Group after the company went broke in 1987. While the film might have been made on a shoestring budget, that never stopped its viewers from seeing some amazing cinematography, a great amount of gore, and some kick-ass action scenes. Jean-Claude Van Damme as Gibson is convincingly badass here, and while Daniel Hubbard Smith and Pyun's screenplay is intriguing, there's no denying that it's Van Damme and his kicks and punches that make this movie work. Do you call yourself a true Van Damme fan? Then mark our words when we say that you certainly can't miss out on Cyborg. The Apple, 1980. Menahem Golan wrote and directed this sci-fi musical film, which was also called Star Rock, in case you didn't know. Truth be told, The Apple happens to be a total camp classic, one that truly deserves to be made as a remake, but sadly, despite us being in 2025, nothing of that sort has happened yet. Speaking of the plotline of the 1980 movie, it has Alfie and Bibi, a young couple taking part in the 1994 World Vision Song Festival, only to find themselves losing to the group BIM, short for Boogaloo International Music, in spite of being highly talented performers. With the leader of BIM approaching the duo to sign to his music label, Bibi finds herself drawn to the darker side of the music industry. Ever seen a movie and found it audaciously, wonderfully bad? Well, you're looking at one of those. You see, the thing about The Apple is that it's so over-the-top, audacious, and transcendentally awful that all of it, when put together, makes it simply wonderful. This infamously bad musical, often considered the worst flick of that genre, is a treasure for fans who dig bad movies and have a thing for cheesy costume design, musical numbers, and dare we say, 80s set design. So here's addressing those of you who still haven't watched the musical masterpiece. We say give in to the temptation and eat that forbidden fruit. Of course, you won't be the same after, but that's a different conversation. Ten to Midnight. 1983, directed by J. Lee Thompson and co-written by William Roberts along with Thompson, this neo-noir thriller film stars the late Charles Bronson as Detective Leo Kessler. Kessler is a seasoned veteran of the force who, along with his partner, is seen investigating a string of murders committed by a psychopathic serial killer who kills women who rebuff his sexual advances. But nabbing the killer seems to be a difficult task, as he's an expert in maintaining airtight alibis. Will Kessler be able to take him down? Well, that's for you to figure out once you've seen the movie. 10 to Midnight proves very quickly that it's very different from the usual cop versus serial killer flicks, because here, the audience knows right from the very beginning who the killer is. Where it builds up on the suspense element is between the killer and his possible victims. As for Bronson, he establishes very quickly in the movie that he's not somebody to be messed with. We're looking at someone who literally takes the law into his own hands, so one can imagine what happens when his daughter becomes the killer's next target. It's not about what's legal anymore, it's about doing what's right. The movie's no masterpiece, but it is a decent thriller that deserves your time. 102 minutes of your time, to be precise. Kickboxer, 1989. David Worth's 1989 martial arts film starring Jean-Claude Van Damme happens to be the first movie to bring Muay Thai, or in simpler words, Thai kickboxing, to a global audience. With a screenplay by Glenn A. Bruce, Kickboxer has Van Damme's Kurt Sloan seeking revenge on the formidable boxing champion Tong the Tiger Po, who was responsible for viciously beating Kurt's brother and leaving him severely crippled as a result. First and foremost, we're looking at a movie here that features a fantastic musical score by Paul Herzog. Of course, Van Damme is the high point, and Mr. Muscles from Brussels in this film is exactly how fans would want him to be. Yes, he also does his trademark splits here, just in case you're wondering. Watching Van Damme's character train throughout the film for a fight at the end is a sheer delight, and may we add that Kickboxer is jam-packed with plenty of great martial arts action sequences. The fights on display are exciting and magnificently choreographed, for which Van Damme gets full credit. Michel Kesey as Tong Po is definitely a nasty villain, and he compliments Van Damme in every way. Enter the Ninja. 1981. Menahem Golan's Enter the Ninja was the first movie in Cannon Films' Ninja trilogy, and it's fair to say that this is the film that literally swept the West by storm, spawning hundreds of ninja-themed flicks from all across the world. With a screenplay by Dick Desmond, the 1981 martial arts film has Cole, an Army veteran, traveling to Manila, Philippines, to meet his war buddy Frank Landers after completing his ninjutsu training. However, upon reaching there, Cole finds Frank and his wife being repeatedly harassed by an American oil tycoon who wishes to buy the property of the Landers. Of course, this has Cole stepping in to safeguard his friend's property. Enter the Ninja categorically has one of the most impressive opening scenes, with Japanese sensation, the legendary Sho Kosugi, displaying his proficient weaponry skills while donning a full ninja uniform. Fans of the movie, including us, will certainly agree that when we first saw this film, all we wanted to do was go to Japan and be a ninja. We're not kidding. At least to every diehard fan of the movie, this is true. Aside from the odd casting of Franco Nero as the lead actor here, the main attraction is irrefutably Kosugi and his excellent demonstrations of martial arts throughout his screen time. So, if you call yourself a fan of Kosugi as well as the genre, this movie certainly calls for an intrinsic viewing right away. The Delta Force, 1986. Menahem Golan's The Delta Force starred Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin, the latter in his final film appearance, as leaders of an elite group of Special Operations Forces personnel based on the real-life U.S. Army Delta Force unit. Story-wise, when a jetliner on the way to Rome gets hijacked by terrorists who order the aircraft to be diverted to Beirut, an elite squad of highly trained soldiers is sent to deal with the predicament and save the passengers on board. In case you didn't know this, the first installment in the Delta Force film series was actually inspired by the real-life hijacking of TWA Flight 847 that took place on the 14th of June, 1985. Naturally, the film is both tense and exciting, packed with a lot of action, and moves at an enjoyable pace. Also, as someone who has seen the movie, we strongly believe that the Delta Force meticulously describes the horror that took place with the utmost precision. The performance of the entire cast is commendable, and the catchy background score by Alan Silvestri of Avengers fame works wonders in favor of the movie. Come on! Death Warrant, 1990, directed by Darren Serafin and written by David S. Goyer, while the latter was a student at the University of Southern California. Death Warrant marked Goyer's first screenplay that was sold and produced commercially. The film has Jean-Claude Van Damme facing a new challenge. This time, he plays the role of Detective Louis Burke, who goes undercover inside a prison facility in California while posing as an inmate in order to find out who's behind a mysterious string of murders taking place inside the jail. However, Burke's cover is blown when he finds himself locked up with his nemesis, Christian Naylor, a psychotic serial killer addressing himself as the Sandman, one who's quite hell-bent on exacting revenge on Burke. Let's be straightforward here. Whenever it's a Van Damme flick, you know it has never been made for artistic value. If we're being honest, Van Damme flicks are solely made to appease one's inner beast, and you can deny it if you want to, but deep down, even you know we're telling the truth. That being said, Death Warrant as a prison movie is quite intense. There's an excellent buildup of suspense, and the thrilling atmosphere of the film keeps us glued to our seats and eyes on the screen for a good 89 minutes. Death Wish 3. The late Michael Winner's Death Wish 3, written by Don Jacoby, has Charles Bronson as the vigilante Paul Kersey, who comes back to New York to visit an old friend. When Paul discovers that his friend has died after being brutally beaten by a gang of thugs, the police chief, upon recognizing Paul, offers him a deal he cannot refuse. Paul can kill all the gang members he wants as long as he informs the chief of the gang activity so that the police can take the credit. Please don't mistake Death Wish 3 for being a patchwork of mindless violence. While there's no denying that the film features a gratuitous amount of mayhem, it has Bronson at his best, and there's no second thoughts about that. There's just something about Charles Bronson taking the law into his own hands that works like a charm every single time. Also, who wouldn't enjoy notorious gangbangers getting their due? This film is a pure product of the 80s and a classic in its own right. If you still haven't watched it, what exactly are you waiting for? Platoon Leader, 1988. Aaron Norris's Platoon Leader is famous for a lot of reasons. For starters, it's the only movie that doesn't have his brother in the cast. Loosely based on James R. McDonoug's memoir, also titled the same, the film is about a new officer fresh from the U.S. military academy arriving in Vietnam to take over his first platoon, comprised of experienced war veterans. The young officer quickly discovers that he has to prove himself and earn the trust of his men if he's to lead them. The movie truly gives one a sense of what the war in Vietnam was like for the soldiers there. The action sequences are very well staged and several hair-raising jungle ambushes and close calls are featured. The cast is great. Michael Dudikoff is superb in the role of the young Army lieutenant, and so is Robert F. Lyons in the role of a sergeant who just doesn't want a new lieutenant to get any of his men killed. Platoon Leader is a refreshing change from the usual cannon fodder. We highly recommend that you give this underrated gem a watch for sure. Marvelous verdict! Well, that's all we got for you today, and with that, we've finally come to the end of our video. So, which of these canon films have you watched, and which ones have you missed out on? Did your favorite movie make it to the list? We hope it did, and if it didn't, let us know which flicks you'd like us to explore next. Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts about this crazy defunct movie production studio. Were you a fan? Let us know everything in the comments down below. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Leave us a thumbs up and subscribe, as we promise to come back with more exciting content. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day. Quick little redo because of a mispronunciation.